Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us at this conference, Gina. And hopefully you guys have had enough coffee, so we'll try to kick this day off with something somewhat exciting. But yeah, today we're going to talk about legacy design systems. Oh, and I'm Jesse. This is Hamish.
Hi.
Like was mentioned, we run two different companies. So the first one is called Standards Manual. We sort of say that we're co-founders of that. And then we are partners at a design office called Order. And we're both in Brooklyn, New York, in the Greenpoint neighborhood. If anyone is over there for the rest of this week, please come say hi. So I would say that we are, designers first. Our sort of primary full-time job is designing mostly, identities, visual languages. So this is just, 4 projects just to sort of show, what we do from a day to day. We've worked with brands like Kickstarter, doing their identity, some composers, direct-to-consumer furniture companies, and then every once in a while we will sort of help with product design and sort of the visual language of that. So primarily, this is sort of what we do, but we also started this company called Standards Manual, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about today. And this is our office out in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. It's a ground level office, so like I said, if you're out in the neighborhood, please come say hi. So this is where we work, but in the front, we have a whole section that is dedicated to graphic design books, and mostly, historical books, some of the classics, some more newer ones. And what I'm going to talk about today are 3 books that we personally published under our imprint Standards Manual. So we're going to sort of start the story back in 2011. Hamish and I, we both worked at Pentagram for about 5-6 years under Michael Beirut. We were associate partners there. And there was sort of this random occurrence that happened when we were downstairs in the basement of what was the old Pentagram building, which is at 204. I don't know if anyone has ever gotten a chance to go to this building. They've since moved, but it was a really magical place and a great building. But it was an old bank, and so in the basement there was a bank vault and sort of just a bunch of trash that had accumulated over the years. And as we were looking for something, we sort of uncovered by random this binder. And so this is the New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual. Hamish and I sort of knew what it was, a few other people did, and then some other people didn't. If you don't know what it is and aren't familiar with this system, we're sort of going to explain a little bit about it first. And so a really brief history about what this manual is and how it applies to design systems and to the city. So in 1904, what we know now as the MTA and the New York City subway system was comprised of 3 separate agencies. So you can read the long names, but basically the IRT, the IND, and the BMT were all separate systems. And they even competed with each other to basically steal riders to ride on their trains versus the other ones. And so when you went underground, it looked something like this. And, this just sort of shows one of those lines, but there were, graphically 3 different languages. The actual writing was different between each of those systems. So it was just a complete mess, and it was very difficult for, people who lived here, but then imagine people who were, visiting New York for the first time. It was just almost impossible to navigate your way around. So in 1966, those 3 companies merged into one, which became the NYCTA. And what that, sort of merging of systems required was sort of a relook at the system that was going to, take people through the entire city. And so the NYCTA hired a firm called Unimark, and it was led. This particular project was led by 2 designers in that firm, Bob Norda, who is, I think, sort of mostly the unknown hero of this system, but most commonly known is Massimo Vignelli, very well known for his, design work for Knoll, American Airlines, the subway system, many other, very prolific design systems. And so these 2 gentlemen were sort of tasked with the problem of how to fix what was a complete visual mess into one cohesive and very understandable system. And so, out of the work that they did, essentially this, this Bible of subway wayfinding design was created. And so really what this is It's not sort of an identity. This isn't a brand. They weren't tasked with designing logos. Really what they were doing was solving a very utilitarian problem, which was just navigation. And so what you'll see is that they did everything from the visual language, but even down to every decision point where signs needed to be placed. And so there's sort of legend that Bob Norda spent, I don't know, months or weeks down underground to really follow riders, and at what point were they getting confused on where to transfer trains, which lines to take, and at which staircase would it be most important to place a larger sign versus a smaller sign. So this was really like the beginning of figuring out this design system, was where do the signs go. And then everything from there sort of followed. So they established a typeface that would be on every single sign, only one typeface, one weights. Then they developed this sort of like dot system where letters and numbers would be in the circles. So you probably, you recognize this system already because it really hasn't changed since the, inception of this language. And so, colors were incorporated. And then what the manual was really useful for was essentially this modular system that was dictated in a very clear and concise language, so that any, sign maker or a fabricator, or if a new station opened up, anyone could make a sign based on every single decision that was made in this book. And so it really is, thinking about, modular web systems, this is sort of one of those original examples, but just put into a wayfinding situation. And so, you have modules with arrows, with text, with the train line sort of dots, and then even down to the details of, the arrows, where there's, I think, a 4-degree optical compensation for the sort of interior counters of those arrows. So really, really fine details that the public will never see, but we all know they're there. And so what you got was this system. This is what it looked like, in the 70s and 80s, and you'll sort of notice the difference of a white background with black type, and this is a black and white photo, but the 4 and 5 are green. And today, this is what we have. And so really, the system has lasted, decades, and really hasn't changed that much. And so I think that's a testament to its strength, its simplicity, and how it works sort of in a very practical sense. So that's sort of a brief history on that language. And so what we did is when we found this manual, we were really excited, and all we wanted to do was share it with other designers and enthusiasts. So we created this website and just put up photographs of every single page. There was a small little magnification tool that you could zoom in and read the text of every page. And we didn't think it would be anything that special, but what happened was in the first week, it got over 250,000 hits, unique visitors. And so we sort of saw that there were 3 different audiences that were also interested in this other than us. So designers, transit enthusiasts, New Yorkers. And so we had always floated this idea of, wouldn't it be cool if we sort of preserved this system in an actual tangible book? And so someone mentioned Kickstarter to us. I know there are probably many creators of Kickstarter in this room. And someone sort of explained that, a normal publisher would never take on publishing such a niche subject matter like this, but Kickstarter is a great way to do that. And so that's what we did. We sort of set out to, preserve this book and just make it available for other people to see, because right now you can only see it in MoMA under a glass case, or if someone has it in a private collection. So, like you do on Kickstarter, we sort of made a video that showed what we were going to make. So this is just a rendering of a hardcover book. Our boss, Michael Beirut, who worked with Massimo Vignelli, graciously narrated the video. And showed things like what the system looked like before, some we call this book porn, of really slow shots of the book, and it looks very sexy. And then the point was that we were going to scan every page in very, very 2400 DPI high resolution and reprint those so that you saw every detail down to like the pencil markings that Massimo himself actually drew. So we set our campaign goal. It was a little over $100,000, which we thought we could scratch by selling 1,000 books, and we had 30 days to do it. And we didn't really require a license from the MTA. They owned the IP, but they sort of had some lack of confidence in us and sort of said, sure, go ahead, do your project. You have 30 days and see what you can do. So like any Kickstarter, we promoted it. We got the official Vignelli Twitter to sort of give us their blessing. Got some press from Gizmodo. This crazy guy, what's his name? Matthew Lesko. I don't know if you remember him from infomercials, getting free money from the government. He interviewed us, and for me, that was like a little dream come true. Anyways, after the 30 days, we raised almost $800,000, but we sold 7,000 books. And so what we found was that people really wanted guidelines for some strange reason. So I think, and we can talk about this afterwards, like why so many people would want this book that's essentially an instruction manual to signs for a subway. But I think everyone in this room can probably relate to their interest just in the design system behind it. So I know this is sort of like a quick recap of the project, but what we did is we wanted it to be a very high quality product. We didn't recreate the binder itself. We wanted it to be something that would last for generations. So we went to Italy to print it there. They're sort of like known for their printing and sort of the Rolls Royce of printing. It's case bound. Like I said, we really high resolution page scans. We use stochastic printing, which is just again a better printing method than a regular dot screen. It has 13 spot colors and it's a full size reproduction. So it's very large. It's about 13 inches square. So I know there's a lot of tech people in the room. We don't deal a lot with tech. We still use ink and paper primarily. But if anyone has never been on press to see a book printed, it's a really fascinating experience, and I recommend everyone do it. But basically, it's printed on these very large sheets. You go and you sort of check color to make sure it's consistently printed. Sort of do a quality check. At the end of it, you sort of get this. So this is the deconstructed book on pallets and reams of paper, and then they'll go and be trimmed and bound, and then produced into a final product, which is this. So yeah, we basically just reissued the original document in its most sort of original state. We didn't do any alterations to the content itself. So you'll see in the book we printed the actual paper tone that it was on. We didn't recreate the files. These aren't vector images. These are just high resolutions, straight scans with some color correction just to make sure that they print correctly. So, we did this for many reasons, again, to sort of make it accessible for younger designers to learn from and really see how things were done manually. I mean, this is a kerning chart on how to place letters next to each other since no computers were ever involved. So really, thinking about again, like design systems, this is sort of such a great example on manual labor and making sure that the system that you want comes out correctly, even hopefully the guys and queens making the signs, whether or not they follow it or not, that sort of fate is in their hands. So, and then after the campaign, it was a limited edition release. We weren't going to ever print that full-size reproduction again. Many people wanted it, so we made a smaller compact edition, and this was sort of the birth of our e-commerce store, and we made a website, which is still now living today. But yeah, so this system we think is really important because of its utility. It's not sort of only just a branding language, but it's something that actually is just purely functional. So this was the first book that we did, and then there was a lot of sort of excitement around these manuals and reissuing them. So in 2015, we did a second book, which Hamish is going to speak a little bit more about.
Yeah, so we're really, we're trying to go for 1,000 books on that original, on the NYCTA. And what Jesse didn't say is, like, we were so shocked to sell nearly, 7,000? Yeah. And it really took us by surprise and kind of actually scared us because we were like, oh, shit, now we have to actually make a really high quality product and get 7,000 books around the world. It was kind of daunting. Luckily, we'd printed books before, but we were really, really happy with how that went, and we wanted to do more. So we went searching for what would be our next title. And what we found was there was a manual that had come up a few times. People had been tweeting at us, like, do this one, do this one. And so we looked into it, and we found that the NASA Graphic Standards Manual from 1975 was up on Twitter, and it had over 100,000 views just for the 59 photos that somebody had put up. So we thought, we're both big space nerds. I would say I'm an extremely big space nerd. And so this was sort of like a no-brainer for us. We're like, let's get on this. So what we did was the designer of this book, both of them are still alive. They're in their 80s, and one of them, the two guys is Bruce Blackburn, and we couldn't get a hold of Bruce, but we got a hold of Richard Daney, and he lives in Napa, and I think he's 85, around there, and just the nicest guy you ever meet, and I think he spoke here 2 years ago. Well, not here, but San Francisco. So I think a lot of you have probably seen some of this stuff that I'm going to show that Richard probably showed. But anyway, we got in touch with Richard. We just emailed his general email off his website, and we said, hey, we did this book last year, the Subway book. What do you think about doing the same thing for the NASA book? And he kind of, I joke about this, but he kind of was like, hey guys, I've been waiting for your call, more or less. So, And luckily he said, hey, I'm coming out to New York next week for an AIGA event. How about I bring my original copy? And we said, great. So he came out, and this was his binder. I think he had 2 copies. So he got on a plane with one of them. They're very valuable. And so this one was smaller. It's a government printed document, so it's 8.5 by 11, and it's in just a binder that you can't buy anymore. It's like a 40 ring bound thing. But these were all in binders because they were designed to be updated. So when they came out, and when the NASA one came out in 75, it was much smaller than what you see today. And so it had sections added in subsequent years when they kind of got around to designing it. But the difference with this manual and why we were interested in it, one, it's NASA, it's very cool, but 2, this is more of a brand system. So whereas the Subway manual was a utilitarian thing, Jesse mentioned it wasn't a logo design project. This kind of was. And then, they were creating a NASA brand essentially and then applying it throughout their system. So you had everything. So a quick backstory on the NASA brand. They had, I think they were founded in 58. It was actually NACA before that, technically, which was founded in 1915, and it was to do with flight. And in 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik. Congress panicked, and they said, okay, NACA, you're kind of doing the stuff that we want. You'll be NASA now. And then that was 58. They launched a satellite in 59, I believe. Please don't quote me on those numbers exactly, but Explorer 1 went up in 59. But when they were founded, they said we need a logo or a seal, and they did a little competition, I guess, within NASA. And so all these engineers in NASA submitted their ideas for the NASA logo, and that's what, I don't want to have a picture of it, but that's what we have now is the NASA worm. The NASA meatball, they call it. So that's the blue circle with NASA in the middle. It has a wing drawing, like an engineer's flight wing. It has some stars around it. It has like a planet. It's really, really detailed, and it's not really a great logo. It's a good seal, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but what the 75 system did was create a great logo for NASA. And in my eyes, this logo here looks like the logo for a space agency, whereas the meatball that we have now is a good seal, but it doesn't really look very high-tech or at the cutting edge of science like it should. So anyway, like I said, Richard and Bruce ran their firm Daney and Blackburn. So they won the RFP, and what we did after we contacted Richard was we got on a plane straight away, went out to meet him at his house in Napa, and we filmed a video for our Kickstarter campaign. So we followed very much the same process that we'd done for the first book. And we kind of, we were on a budget. We kind of just did everything ourselves. You can watch all of these videos on our website. And they kind of got better, I think, as we went. So this is our second one. It was better than the first one. But please, we're not filmmakers. But have a look. So Richard, he's a jazz pianist. He played some music for us, which we incorporated. And this was our idea. This is what we put on the Kickstarter page. We wanted to package it in kind of like, those space food bags that you used to get as a kid. And so this is the cover of the actual manual put onto a space bag. And then this is what we mocked up for Kickstarter, was just, the pages, again, reproduced. And so the manual itself goes through from the high-level logo down to everything for, how to place it on the space shuttle, and how to put it on uniforms. Really, really kind of a broad spectrum of how to apply this brand. And everything, you can see here, everything was really spec'd out in a really detailed written way. But a lot of the page graphics themselves are very, very simple. So, that idea of deep specification goes way back to here. So the launch day happened for our Kickstarter campaign, and we're lucky enough to get an interview with New York Times. And a little bit of a snarky headline, but they put a story out. Kenneth Chang's the science writer there. And so this was really a good kickstart, I guess, for our campaign. And we got a lot of press this time. The first campaign, nobody wanted to write about it. I think Steve Heller wrote a blog post on his blog for our first campaign. That was all we could get. But this time around, we had a little bit of momentum, so we were able to get that story. This time, the goal, we wanted to do 2,000 books at a minimum, and it was going to cost that much to print that. We did a 32-day campaign, and this time around, it's a little hard to see, but we sold nearly 10,000 books, nearly $1 million raised. All of that goes to the printing. but it kind of blew us away again. So that was fantastic. So, you know, the video's on our website. You should look at it. This is the final product. We did the space bag, a little bit different to the rendering, but this has become a really well-loved feature of the book. And then the book itself, we printed, again, full size. This is a color specifications page. And these, in the original, these were perforated, so you'd actually tear these out, go and match it on the paint that you were actually using to get it right. So it goes through everything from the brand through to signage for the centers. And the funny thing with NASA is what happened was in the 90s, I think 93, they actually rescinded this whole program. NASA, after the Apollo program kind of lost its way, the shuttle program and the disaster of Challenger happened, and NASA had a new administrator come in. This is a brief version. But the new administrator was trying to revitalize NASA, and a lot of the old guys at NASA hated this logo. So they said to him, Dan Golden, they said, if you really want to fix NASA, get rid of that damn worm logo. And he said, I can do that? And they said, yeah, of course you can. So the next day they ripped this out. But the funny thing is they've kept a lot of the other stuff. So a lot of NASA's graphics are still in Helvetica. They've just replaced the worm logo with their meatball. So what our book contains, we're big on not just, you know, we don't just want to reprint the manual. We're putting in all this extra information. So these are slides from the original presentation that they gave to NASA that Richard gave us. We also included kind of scans of this manager's guide, which was a supplemental book that came out a year later. So all of this extra stuff tries to describe the story. What we don't have pictures of as well is there's 6,000 word essays in the beginning of these books by Chris Bonanos, who works for New York Magazine. He's a big sort of corporate history writer. And so he wrote those essays, and they're actually available for free on our website. And what's funny is, and you can't attribute this to these projects, but in the last few years, and thanks to Hypebeast for these images, in the last few years, all of these collaborations have been coming out, and this brand of this 70s NASA brand has sort of come back into the public sphere. And so all of these collaborations, a lot with fashion, have been happening. So, you know, it's not because of us, but it's interesting timing. But what's cool is that Richard Daney has actually had sort of a renaissance of his career. You know, speaking here 2 years ago was one of the early times that he spoke, and he's since spoken at NASA and a lot of other conferences. So it's very cool. So lastly, we're going to talk about one more manual that we did in 2017, and this was for the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. So it came at a strange time because the EPA was sort of under threat with our current administration, and the EPA manual was designed in around the time of NASA. I think 77 it was released. It was designed by these two guys. We've got a video that we're going to show coming up, so I'm not going to describe it too much because the video will do a better job than I can. But the EPA manual is, if those first two were utility and brand, this one was kind of a mixture of both. It had a high-level brand, but what was cool about it was that it was a flexible design system, and it was a really, we think, an early example of that. It had EPA was broken into departments, and the designers assigned each department with patterns and colors, which could then be combined into, you can see them at the bottom of these pages, into all of their kind of deliverables. So doing that now kind of seems like common sense, and we do that a lot designing brands, but this was a fairly early example of it, and so we were really interested in this manual from that point of view. So I will play the video now and check it out. It's only 5 minutes. So this is what we released on Kickstarter, and it should give you a good sense of the project.
Each of us all across this great land has a stake in maintaining and improving environmental quality, clean air and clean water, the wise use of our land, the protection of wildlife and natural beauty. These are part of the birthright of every American. To guarantee that birthright, we must act, and act decisively. It is literally now or never.
Tom Geismar, a graphic designer, one of the founders of what's now Chermayeff and Geismar and Haviv. We had done a lot of work with the Park Service, you know, before this thing, and that's something I was very involved in. And so the EPA was sort of an outgrowth of that in some ways, in terms of what they were about and what they were trying to do. We thought it was important to do it. The thing with the EPA thing that I most remember is that they really had a serious issue because at that point, this is what, 1975, 76, something like that, they had offices all around the country, and they had found that these offices were doing all their own brochures and things, promoting different programs. And
it takes quite a sizable guidelines to accomplish this kind of thing. It's simple, it's clean. If you don't know about it because you're from somewhere else in another language or another part of the world, you can still see this identity and understand vaguely what it's all about.
Steph was the one mostly involved with this.
I, was very lucky to more or less given this project for the EPA to redesign their identity first of all, and then really establish a manual. But what we did is, we tried to simplify it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We just said, let's keep the idea of the flower, but make it simpler and stronger and simpler to reproduce. Let's make it one color. It could be in black, it could be in white, it could be reversed out, it could be in all these other colors, including the name. And one of the most interesting parts of the project was that it included a system to actually talk about all the different categories of protection they were concerned about. And so we ended up doing, noise and toxic substances and radiation and technology transfer, air, water, R&D, pesticides, and solid waste, which were 9 departments, or sub-departments, I should say, of the EPA. The lady who was, at the time, the head, was the one who didn't accept the system simply because she says, I don't like the stationery, I want my daisy back. I think that derailed the whole system later on.
I think what's amazing about these manuals and the other identities as well is that the world is constantly changing, technology is changing, but the approach to design has not changed. Government is many things, not to be too political, but I'm not, how much the government should be involved in the life of its citizens is up for debate and discussion. I think with the EPA, it's funny that this is a very elaborate set of guidelines for a governmental agency, but the government being a standard bearer for many things, including striving to excel in design, is a time that I wish will come back.
These problems will not stand still for politics or for partisanship. They demand to be met now. The time has come for man to make his peace with nature. Let us renew our commitment. Let us redouble our effort. The quality of our life on this good land is a cause to unite all Americans.
Say what you will about Nixon, but they did create the EPA.
If you want later, there's a little hidden track to that video that we won't play now.
Yeah.
You can watch that.
Super nerdy.
That told the whole story. I won't sort of reiterate anything that was already said, but we did end up getting that campaign funded and reproduce the manual. So, every book that we do, we sort of like to up the production quality, and so we did this chipboard slipcase and sort of blind debossed the logo on the cover and had the interior in this blue paper, which was sort of EPA blue from that chart. And yeah, like Hamish said, it is sort of a mix between a very straightforward corporate identity with very, very granular detail on how to use that identity, but also the integration of this system, which I know this looks so like common and like everyone just uses, 10 different colors for their brand now and sort of give it to any sort of division within the company. But this was sort of a very new idea at the time. And so, yeah, each color, if you can read, I don't know if it's too small, but, radiation red, technology purple, EPA blue. So it really was thinking about these as sub-brands and how they could be distinct as well as part of a much larger, organization. So, those patterns and how they were given each a color, and then same thing. So, every sort of color page that was perforated, and so this one, we think now that we sort of like take for granted how easy it's done with computers, but all this stuff had to be done manually. And then the second part of this book was like NASA. We incorporated those original slides. There was a photography initiated called Documerica, where how many photographers? 20. More? 50. Yeah, 52 photographers were sent out across America to essentially, document what was going on, not only in the environment, but also just life at the time. And so we have a selection of images from each of those photographers in the book that sort of show, and, again, I know you can't read them here, but the captions sort of really describe the horrific environmental issues that were going on at the time, whether it was toxic waste or, sludge in the water. It was pretty shocking. So that's included. So those are all the three sort of manuals that we're going to talk about. And basically, 4 years later, and we've published 6 titles. So the 3 that you saw, and then we've sort of we've done one other manual, which is for the American Revolution Bicentennial, designed by Bruce Blackburn, who was the counterpart to Richard Daney, which is in the top right-hand corner there. A little bit more of a facsimile. It's a smaller document. And then we've went on to publish a book called NYCTA Objects, which are different sort of ephemera and objects from the MTA transit system. It's more of a photography book. And then this is Chermayeff and Geismar's 60-year monograph. So we've sort of become this publishing company out of this one small project that we just wanted to, give that Vignelli book to others who couldn't get it. And, we're not full-time publishers, but we really like doing it. So, why these systems we think are critical to archive. We have 3 reasons. There are probably many more. But the first one really is the writing of them. And so I hope, all of you, basically, what we do now with documentation was done here in a much, earlier way, but they were so clear and concise and articulate, and we just want that sort of authority in writing to sort of continue. And so, it's not really about setting rules that, making sure no one breaks the rules, but it really is setting the foundation in a very clear, simple, but, articulate way that people can build on top of, and then it becomes, a much more creative outlet for anyone using that system. But the writing was very, very much a part of this that we wanted to capture. We talk to a lot of students who don't even know how photography works, and they think that everything is just taken with an iPhone. So we don't want the same thing to happen with brand systems. We think that younger designers, students should really know the history of where brand systems started, even though they're not using, these has nothing to do with technology and sort of digital products. Still the same principles really apply. So we think that there's sort of a necessity for students to learn from there. And then these were never intended to be commercial publications. They were reserved for internal use only, but even today, I think guidelines and systems are shared a lot more, which is great. And we think that hopefully we can do our part with legacy systems on showing the very, very early examples, and so that people can learn from them and share them and continue on with the great work that is to be done. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish and Jesse. So, what a wonderful tour. I'm wondering, can you talk about timelessness from the perspective of these systems lasted decades, or these kinds of systems last decades? I mean, the transit authority might last century or centuries. And so, what about our practice today makes longevity so much more difficult? Why do we have to go back so far to see the things that last? And should we strive for timelessness in our own work, or is actually striving for adaptability and change a different way to approach it?
Well, the only short thing I would say is that I think the tools are much more available to implement, design systems. Where back then, not everyone sort of had access to implement a design system. graphic designers were rare. Our sort of profession was very new. And so it sort of took a master and sort of a craftsman to implement these systems that were being done, where now it's very easy to sort of get your hands on, software and sort of and learn about it and then become really good at it and then put it out there in the world. But what that also does, I think, is make room for things to change earlier than they need to, just for the sake of change, because, it's a year old, we're sort of sick of it, let's sort of change it a little bit, where these things, no one really could do that because they didn't have the tools.
Yeah, and I think nobody sets out to design things that are timeless. It kind of just happens to some things that kind of get through. I mean, if you are, we don't like to say that word with our clients, timelessness, because it's very arrogant to say, oh, I'm designing this thing, it's timeless. Because, who can say? But there's a number of, I think one of the reasons that the MTA thing hasn't changed is the MTA just doesn't have any money, and it's good enough. Well, it's great, but it's good enough. And so luckily through kind of poverty of the system, it is endured and evolved over time a little bit, but it's still kind of there. So I think that's great that it hasn't changed. But then I think today you see a lot of people change for the sake of change. Like Jesse said, a lot of people come into an organization, perhaps marketing people, sorry if you're here, but they're notorious for this. They'll come in and they'll want to put their own brand on things, and, we have to redesign because I'm the marketing person and we have to market. And they'll come in and they'll redesign something just for the sake of it, just to put their own kind of thing on the wall. So that's a bit of it's not a great aspect of what we do today, and I wish things did last longer than they do.
And that was the case with NASA. That's like when that changed. It was a new administrator. I'm here. I'm new. Let's change. So.
Yeah, I've been through a couple of those myself, and those are really hard to cope with.
Everyone here has experience.
And so another dimension of this is the relationship of the master craftsman of all of us. And so I look at people like Jasenia. I look at people like Dan, who is going to speak later this morning. And I think they are master craftsmen. And they help, like Jennifer yesterday with illustration, help everybody else lift their own practice. But at times, they are also the craftsmen that other people depend on. And so these manuals that you showed that had the kerning, particularly that you had to help people do that because they didn't have computers. Now computers can help us at least have a starting point for that. What is the role of a craftsman making these identity systems and the autonomy that the people that then implement those systems should have or shouldn't have?
I think the role of the craftsperson is being lost, sadly, a little bit, and partly because of the tools. But we're seeing, we employ designers a lot, and we're finding that some basic things, and I guess things change over time, but some things that we take for granted as basic skills are not being taught or are not being picked up by these by young designers today. So I think that role of the craftsperson is super important to retain. But our software today does so many things for us, but there's still no button that you can press that does everything, right? You still need that.
Not yet.
Not yet, right? Phew. But kind of a little anecdote from the MTA system was, it's not publicized or it's not written in the manual, of course, but Massimo Vignelli reportedly kind of thought that the sign makers, and it was all made in Queens at this sign shop, he kind of thought they were like the biggest idiots out there. And they were kind of, they were like guys, they were like paint signs, and they were just like, guys. And they were kind of, you know what I mean?
Dumb guys.
Yeah. Probably great people, but they weren't, he was trained in Milan, he was Italian, he was meticulous.
Drank espressos every morning or every hour.
Everything was perfect for Massimo, so these guys were not good enough for him, and so he really dumbed the manual down, he said, to make it kind of foolproof in a way.
Yeah.
Does that mean we should disrespect our system users?
No.
No.
I was actually just going to follow up and say that it's right. And so what now in-house teams have the responsibility of carrying through the craft of other people and the people who create the systems. If you work I think I've worked in-house before, and it sort of can become laborious and repetitive to do the same thing over and over again. You sort of I want to put some flair into it and put your own mark on it. But I think it's really the responsibility of those teams teams to trust that there's been a system built and there are decisions made for a reason, and only sort of change when it's necessary. And I don't know what Dan is going to talk about, but even at the dinner, we sort of spoke a lot about in-house teams and how they're incorporated into these larger systems. And I think when we work with larger brands and organizations that do have an in-house team, we always involve them in the very beginning so that they can see where the craft is put in and sort of the details that we really stress out about, and how we're sort of handing them our baby, saying, please take care of this and make sure that it lives for a very long time to become hopefully one day a timeless design. But yeah, so in-house teams are important.
So I'm going to take a risk and totally extend this metaphor in a really weird way. But what if there are lines of business, different families, like you saw with the EPA, and they all have their own babies that they want to grow up?
Oh.
And so you become a facilitator. What do you do as a person creating a system that has a core identity but needs to flex, and beyond just saying give them a different color or a different symbol?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that one of the biggest tools, or kind of weapons we call it, that is being kind of deployed more and more now, is typography for that reason, and custom typography. So more and more brands are releasing custom typefaces, and of course the big thing is that you can differentiate yourself by using custom type, but they can save a lot of money by doing that. But we've worked on tons of brands where you have departments within, and this just happens in organizations, especially large ones, where little units within will start a new initiative, and it's their own baby, and they want their own logo, and they want their own look and feel. And so it's the job of the identity designer to create rules that kind of it's not like stomping on those things, but allow some flexibility for those things to work within the system. So typography is a big way to do that, and we've done a project. We did a project at Pentagram for the American Institute of Architects, where all of their little subcommittees still could have their own logo, but they had to set it in the AIA custom font that we'd designed. And so overnight they switched, and all of a sudden everything kind of looked on brand, even though they had their own funny little logos, they had the same typography. So that's one way that we like to do it, but it is a real challenge with brands.
So part of your videos, which were, I would say, very well done.
The last one,
maybe that's your next.
The
step.
EPA was.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the EPA. So, and particularly the taking of the book out of its sleeved case and so on, it really fetishized, in a way, the documentation, the package that you created to surround everything that you had. Really got its own love. And in design systems, we have to do that too, because there's really the library, all the parts that we have, and then how we wrap it in a documentation kit. So for us, often people see the documentation as a reflection of what they can or can't do with the system itself. How do you bridge those two things together, and is that package worth it to heavily invest in?
Yeah, I mean, listen, design should be beautiful. It should be attractive, and it should also work really well. And so, it's a constant balance for designers in any sort of, profession, whether it's, fashion design, interior design, architecture, digital product design, to make it look really inviting and beautiful, but also have it function really well. So just because it's, highly functional doesn't mean that it needs to be sort of boring. And so, yeah, we sort of invest a lot in making it attractive, because if you're going to have something in your house, or if you're going to look at something every day, it might as well be nice to look at.
Yeah, and our old boss, when we were doing these projects at Pentagram, we would occasionally cop some flack on Twitter about the packaging, or this fetishization of, I can't say that word, of these manuals. But Michael said, what's the point of being a designer if you can't kind of fetishize this stuff, every now and then. So I think it's important that these things also look good, because we are designers, and there's no reason to make something ugly just because it's a utilitarian product.
Yeah, it's if you get a book and it's printed on cheap paper and it's flimsy and it falls apart after a year, you're going to throw it away. But if you get a book that is solid and is going to last decades and decades, you're sort of least likely to toss it. So making things that don't become trash, I think, is our constant goal, because so much of what we do does become trash very quickly.
And the NASA book, the books are generally wrapped in plastic, right, and shrink wrapped. And the NASA book, we said, we don't want to do plastic. Let's put it in a foil bag, because that's cool, but it will also probably protect the book better than the plastic bag. So that foil bag was actually a utilitarian solution for us, but it became one of the major features of the book, and people were actually saving the bags. They were emailing us to sell more bags to them, which we just didn't have. We just didn't expect that. And we even got an email once from, I think it was a mother somewhere who had given the book to her son for Christmas. And she got the book and just like tore off the silver wrapping and like threw it away. And then she wrapped the book in paper. And then the kid got the book and was like, "Mom, where's the wrapper?" And so we had to like get an old wrapper. We found one and we sent it to her. So it became like a big part of the book.
That's great. And so thinking about this is the last question, where we go and think about our own legacy, the stuff we make is all digital. There's no physical object to a design system documentation site or the actual library of assets we create. What do we need to do, and should we do anything to preserve our own legacy?
Well, I think it should be preserved as best as it can. I mean, we're probably the least qualified people to maybe answer it from a technical standpoint. But, even we design a lot of brand manuals for our clients today, and historically they've been PDFs. Well, historically they've been printed. Then they sort of moved to PDFs, which are sort of out of date the second that you export it. And so now we are moving to digital guidelines. And we think, again, it's different from exactly what most people in this room are doing. But even having guidelines live as a living, breathing document rather than something that is sort of locked in and can never change or is expensive to update is something that we're sort of moving into. So, yeah, do the best that you can to sort of preserve that.
Yeah, and for a lot of brands, if we're designing a high-level brand, there is that online brand component where you can download the fonts, you can download the logos, but what we often will do now is design kind of a high-level printed piece, kind of a brand book, you might call it, where it kind of is a summary guidelines where it's very, very simple, and you get to design it. Like, it's really nice, and you get to print it up, and it's something that you can give to people, because there's still something special about, we think, about a physical product and a physical book that is difficult to replicate digitally. So we're kind of making a hybrid of the two.
Hamish, Jesse, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.